In 1990, a six-figure salary meant you'd made it. You were rich. You could buy a house with a swimming pool, take your family on vacations, and retire comfortably. Fast forward to 2026, and making $100,000 a year might barely cover rent in a major city, daycare for two kids, and your student loans. What the hell happened to the American dream? What's up, everyone? I'm Sean, and welcome back to the channel where we talk about the personal finance realities that your parents' financial advisors won't tell you about. You know, I started this channel because I was tired of the outdated advice floating around out there. Just save 10% of your income and you'll be fine. A six-figure salary means you're set for life. Anyone can afford a house if they just budget better. Really? Because last I checked, the playbook our parents used is written in invisible ink in 2026. Today, we're diving into something that keeps coming up in your comments, in my DMs, and honestly, in my own conversations with friends. Why does making $100,000 a year feel less like making it and more like barely making it? But before we break down the numbers, the psychology, and the systemic changes that got us here, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and turn on notifications. This channel is growing because you're sharing it with people who need to hear this stuff. Let's keep that momentum going. All right, let's get into it. Let me introduce you to Sarah and James. They're a couple living in Austin, Texas. Not New York, not San Francisco, but Austin. Both are 34 years old. Sarah is a marketing manager making $58,000. James is a software developer making $105,000. Combined household income? $163,000. On paper, they should be crushing it, right? James alone crossed that magical six-figure threshold that, in 1990, would have put him in the top 5% of earners. But here's their reality. They live in a modest 1,200-square-foot rental because buying feels impossible. They drive a 2019 Honda Civic because car prices are insane. They have $87,000 in combined student debt, and they're delaying having kids because they can't figure out how they'd afford childcare at $1,500 per month per child. Does this sound rich to you? Because it sure as hell doesn't to them. The purchasing power collapse. Here's where it gets interesting. Let's do some time travel. In 1990, $100,000 had the purchasing power of approximately $241,000 in 2026 dollars when you account for inflation. Think about that. To have the same lifestyle that a $100K salary provided in 1990, you'd need to make nearly $250,000 today. But it's not just general inflation. It's what has gotten expensive that really matters. Let's break down the big three expenses that have absolutely exploded. Housing. The median home price in 1990 was $123,000. Adjusted for general inflation, that should be about $297,000 today. But what's the actual median home price in 2026? Try $412,000. And that's the median. In cities where the jobs are, you're looking at $600,000 to $1.2 million for a basic family home. In 1990, someone making $100K could buy a median-priced home with a mortgage that was about 1.2 times their annual salary. Today, someone making $100K is looking at a home that's 4.1 times their annual salary. Education? Don't even get me started. In 1990, the average cost of tuition, room and board at a four-year public university was about $10,000 per year in today's dollars. In 2026, we're looking at $28,000 to $35,000 per year after aid. That's a 180 to 280% increase beyond general inflation. Healthcare. Don't get me started. In 1990, the average family health insurance premium was about $6,000 per year in today's dollars. Now, try $25,000 to $30,000 for a family plan, even with employer contributions. The tax reality. And we haven't even talked about taxes yet. Here's something that blows people's minds. The federal tax bracket structure means that someone making $100,000 is taking home roughly $70,000 to $75,000 after federal, state taxes in most states, Social Security, and Medicare. So that six-figure salary is actually a $70K salary in terms of what you can actually spend. In a high-tax state like California or New York, you're looking at closer to $65,000 take-home. Now, let's see how far that actually goes. The monthly budget reality check. Let's build a realistic budget for someone making $100,000 in a mid-size American city. Not Manhattan, not San Francisco, but think Denver, Austin, Charlotte, Nashville, cities where normal people live. Take-home pay, $5,800 per month. Here's where it goes. Rent, one-bedroom apartment, $1,800. Student loan payment, $600. Car payment, $450. Car insurance, $150. Gas, $200. Health insurance, employee contribution, $350. Groceries, $500. Utilities, electric, water, internet, phone, $250. 401k contribution, just 6% for company match, $500. That's $4,800 right there. We haven't included eating out, entertainment, clothing, healthcare copays and deductibles, saving for a home down payment, or any emergency fund contributions. You've got $1,000 left for everything else in life. This is why $100,000 doesn't feel rich anymore, because it isn't.
Here's something that's changed fundamentally since 1990. Where you can live versus where the jobs are. In 1990, good-paying jobs were more geographically distributed. You could work in manufacturing in Michigan, in corporate offices in Ohio, in tech in various mid-sized cities. There was more economic diversity across regions. But in 2026, we've seen extreme geographic concentration of high-paying jobs. Tech jobs cluster in expensive coastal cities, finance in New York. Even many traditional corporate jobs have concentrated in a handful of expensive metros. Let me tell you about Marcus. He's a talented data analyst from rural Pennsylvania. He got his degree, learned Python and SQL, built an impressive portfolio. He was offered a job in San Francisco for $95,000. He was ecstatic until he did the math. A studio apartment in SF, $2,800 a month. That's $33,600 per year, or about 47% of his take-home pay. The rule of thumb is to spend no more than 30% of your gross income on housing. Marcus would be spending 47% of his take-home pay. He turned down the job and found something in Pittsburgh for $68,000. Ironically, his purchasing power is higher making $68,000 in Pittsburgh than it would be making $95,000 in San Francisco. This is the geographic trap. The highest salaries are often in the places where they're worth the least. The lifestyle inflation trap. Now, I want to be fair here and address something real. Lifestyle expectations have also changed. Our parents didn't have $120 a month cell phone bills. They didn't subscribe to Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, Spotify, and 3 other services. They didn't have gym memberships, meal kit deliveries, or spend $6 on coffee. And you know what? That's a fair point, to a degree. But here's the thing. Some of these lifestyle inflations aren't really optional anymore. A smartphone isn't a luxury in 2026. It's required for most jobs, banking, healthcare, and basic navigation. Internet isn't a luxury. It's a utility as essential as electricity. The average American spends about $200 to $300 a month on subscription services that didn't exist in 1990. Let's even grant that this is pure lifestyle inflation. That's $3,600 per year. That's real money, but it's not the reason someone making $100K can't afford a house. The median home price has increased by $115,000 more than inflation would predict. You'd have to cancel subscriptions for 32 years to make up that difference, and by then, the house would be even more expensive. See, this is what bothers me. There's this narrative that people making 6 figures are struggling because they're bad with money, because they waste money on avocado toast and streaming services. But the math doesn't support that narrative. The math shows structural economic shifts that have fundamentally changed what a dollar can buy. The wealth transfer failure. Here's another massive change. Generational wealth transfer has slowed to a crawl for the middle class. In previous generations, there was an implicit social contract. Work hard, save money, build equity in a home, and pass something down to your kids. That gave each generation a leg up. But look at what's happening now. Baby boomers are living longer, which is great, but they're also spending more of their savings on healthcare in retirement. The wealth they built in home equity is getting consumed by medical expenses, assisted living, and extended retirements. Meanwhile, they're stuck in their homes. They bought houses in the 80s and 90s when prices were reasonable. Now those homes are worth $700,000. But if they sell, where do they go? They can't afford to downsize because smaller homes in desirable retirement areas cost nearly as much. This creates a bottleneck. The housing stock gets locked up, prices stay high, and the wealth transfer that helped previous generations doesn't materialize for many millennials and Gen Z. Let me tell you about Rachel.
She's 38, makes $92,000 as a nurse practitioner. Her parents live in a home they bought in 1987 for $145,000 that's now worth $680,000. She always assumed that, eventually, she might inherit that home, or at least a portion of its value. But her dad developed Parkinson's disease. Her mom had a stroke. They've been in assisted living for 3 years at $8,000 a month. That house is getting sold, and every penny will go to their care, as it should. But that expected generational wealth transfer? Gone. Rachel isn't resentful. She loves her parents and wants them cared for, but she's had to completely recalibrate her financial future. No inheritance means no down payment help. At $92K in her city, she's looking at another decade of saving to afford even a modest condo. This is playing out in millions of American families right now. There's a psychological element to this that we need to address. Why making $100K feels particularly frustrating in 2026. It's not just about the absolute dollars, it's about relative position and shattered expectations. When you're growing up, you hear $100,000 salary thrown around as the benchmark of success. Movies, TV shows, casual conversations, 6 figures was the goal. So you work your ass off, you get the degree, take on the debt, climb the ladder, master the skills, and then you finally break $100K and you're still stressed about money. You still can't afford the house. You're still living paycheck to paycheck, just with bigger paychecks. The psychological whiplash is intense, and social media makes it worse. You're seeing carefully curated versions of other people's lives. The friend who bought a house, you don't see the $80,000 they got from their parents for the down payment. The couple with the new car, you don't see the 7-year loan at 8% interest. The influencer with the perfect life, you don't see the debt behind the facade. The hustle culture trap. This has spawned an entire industry telling you that the solution is to hustle harder. Start a side hustle, build passive income. You need multiple income streams. And look, I'm not entirely against side hustles. I have this channel. But here's what bothers me. We've normalized the idea that a full-time job, even one making 6 figures, isn't enough. That you need to monetize your hobbies, sacrifice your weekends, and turn yourself into a 24/7 income-generating machine. That's not normal. That's not how it used to be. That's not how it should be. A $100,000 salary should be enough to live a comfortable middle-class life, buy a modest home, raise kids, take occasional vacations, save for retirement. That's not asking for luxury. That's asking for basic economic security. The fact that we've accepted you need 3 income streams as normal is a sign of how broken things have become. The guilt and shame. Here's the really insidious part. People making $100K who are struggling feel guilty about it. They know there are people making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 who have it harder. They know they're objectively privileged compared to many Americans, so they suffer in silence. They don't talk about their struggles because they feel like they don't have the right to complain. I make 6 figures. Who am I to say I'm struggling? But here's the thing. Economic struggle is relative to costs and expectations. You can acknowledge that you're privileged relative to some people while also acknowledging that the system isn't working like it's supposed to. Someone making $100K in San Francisco struggling to afford rent isn't being dramatic. They're responding to an economic reality where the median 1-bedroom apartment costs $3,400 a month. We need to stop confusing individual relative privilege with systemic function. Yes, you might be better off than someone making less, but that doesn't mean the system is working. It means different people are getting screwed to different degrees.
Here's something that should blow your mind. American worker productivity has increased by approximately 65% since 1990. We're producing way more value per hour of work. But wages? Adjusted for inflation, they've only increased about 17%. Where did that productivity gain go? Corporate profits and asset appreciation that primarily benefited people who already had wealth. In 1990, the average S&P 500 CEO made about 61 times what the average worker made. In 2026, it's over 350 times. This isn't about hating on success. This is about pointing out that the gains from productivity improvements haven't been shared with the people generating that productivity. If wages had kept pace with productivity, that $100K salary would actually be closer to $140K to $150K. The asset price explosion. Here's the other fundamental shift. We've moved from an economy where wages mattered most to an economy where asset ownership matters most. In 1990, if you worked hard and earned a good salary, you could build wealth through savings and buying a home. The path was earn money, save money, buy assets, build wealth. But in 2026, asset prices have increased so much faster than wages that the people who already owned assets won the game. If you owned a home in 2000, you've watched it appreciate by 200 to 400%. If you own stocks, same thing. But if you're trying to get into asset ownership now, trying to buy your first home, trying to invest for the first time, you're buying in at peak prices with wages that haven't kept up. We've created an economy where when you were born matters more than how hard you work. Someone born in 1960 could buy a median home at age 30 in 1990 for 2.5 times their annual salary if they made 50K. Someone born in 1990 trying to buy a median home at age 30 in 2020 needed 4.5 times their annual salary. That's not a difference in work ethic. That's a difference in economic structure. The policy choices. And let's be real, these changes didn't just happen naturally. They're the result of policy choices. Zoning laws that restrict housing supply, tax policies that favor capital gains over wages, the financialization of housing as an investment asset, the defunding of public universities shifting costs to students, healthcare tied to employment instead of being universal. These were choices, and choices can be changed. Okay, so what do you actually do with this information? First, stop feeling guilty or broken. If you make 100K and you're struggling, you're not bad with money, you're living in an expensive time in an expensive system. Second, optimize what you can control. Geographic arbitrage is real. If you can work remotely, consider lower cost areas. A 100K salary in Cleveland or Pittsburgh goes way further than in Boston or LA. Housing is the biggest lever. This might mean renting longer than you'd like. It might mean buying further out. It might mean getting creative with roommates or multi-generational living. Attack high-interest debt aggressively. In this environment, debt is quicksand. Max out tax-advantaged accounts, 401ks, HSAs, IRAs. These are some of the only remaining advantages available to W-2 employees. The collective level. But personal optimization isn't enough. We also need to be honest about what needs to change systemically. Housing policy. We need to build more housing, especially medium density. Zoning reform isn't sexy, but it matters. Healthcare reform. Tying healthcare to employment is insane and locks people into jobs they hate. Education costs. The explosion in college costs without a corresponding increase in quality is unsustainable. Wage productivity link. We need to have honest conversations about how productivity gains are shared. I know some of you will say that's political or stay in your lane, Sean, but personal finance doesn't exist in a vacuum. You can budget perfectly and still get screwed by a broken housing market. Being good with money is necessary but not sufficient in 2026. Look, here's the bottom line. A $100,000 salary in 2026 is still good money. It's still more than most Americans make. It provides options that lower incomes don't. But it's not what it used to be. It doesn't provide the security, the comfort, or the lifestyle that it did a generation ago. And pretending otherwise, telling people they just need to budget better or work harder, is gaslighting. The American middle class is getting squeezed. People making six figures are feeling it. People making less are feeling it even more. Acknowledging that isn't complaining, it's seeing reality clearly. And seeing reality clearly is the first step to changing it, both in your personal finances and in our collective economic structures. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment with your experience. What does your financial reality look like at your income level? And if you haven't already, subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. We're building a community of people who are done with financial BS and ready for honest conversations. I'm Sean. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.